Hey guys, I'm here to share a new product I just got that I think I'm going to use as my free play in Shannon Green's Journaling by Fives when I finish step 5. In the meantime, I wanted to do a little experiment here on this paper and share this product. I've been asked a lot about my watercolor paints and my watercolor palette, which you can see a little bit of right here. I have a variety of brands of watercolor paints, but mostly what I have are Daniel Smith watercolors. I really like the Daniel Smith brand, and they are the type that come in a tube like this. They're not super cheap, so I only buy 1 or 2 at a time until I had all the colors that I wanted. But they do last a long time, and I just squeeze some out of my palette and let it dry completely, and then when I want to paint, I reconstitute it with water. When the well starts to run low, I just refill it from the little tube I have in a drawer under the table. I like the Daniel Smith products. I like their paint a lot. I do have some Winsor Newton, some Grumbacher, some Talents, all which are very good. And they are all part of my palette. I even have a couple of Van Gogh watercolors. Fabulous. My favorite thing from the Daniel Smith line is, besides I like their paints, but I also like their grounds and their different watercolor grounds. I love them. So they have Watercolor Ground, which is gesso for watercolor. Think of it that way. It makes whatever you want to paint on more porous and absorbent and properly reactive to the watercolors than it would be without them. And I have a sample I can show you too. So Golden makes an absorbent ground which works great with watercolors. I think Liquitex may have a similar color. I'm not positive, but I think both of those brands only have it in white. They may have it in other colors now. They didn't when I first got them, and I do have Golden's Absorbent Ground, and I do love it. And I did put some on here, but what I have is white. Daniel Smith makes their ground, which is basically their version of Absorbent Ground. They make it in white, and it's a very white, opaque white, so it really covers and it will obliterate whatever you put on there. Golden's Absorbent Ground, as you can still see the base coat through the absorbent ground. I purposely put kind of a thinner coat of it on here, but even with a couple of layers, you could still see the Sharpie drawing through it. With the Daniel Smith, it would almost disappear. The thing I like about the Daniel Smith product in particular is that they have their ground in white, buff, black, and transparent. You heard me right, transparent. So think clear gesso for watercolors. Love that idea. That means that we can do a mixed media background, something with acrylic paint and collage, all kinds of glue or whatever. Let it dry, and you can put a layer of this transparent watercolor ground on there, and then you can do watercolors and water-soluble things on top of it, and it will stick properly. It won't rub off, and it's going to react the way you want it to and spread nicely. It's not going to be blotchy. So, and on that note, so here is a sample I did really quickly when my absorbent ground came in. And I took, this is one of my 1-minute faces, and on the right side of her face, I put a layer of the transparent watercolor ground. On the left side, I did not. So it was just whatever was on the paper, raw paper, acrylic paint, some matte medium, and you can tell if you look at it on the left side how blotchy the coloring is. That's because the watercolor is reacting and not really absorbing into and spreading out smoothly on the other things that are on the paper. But on this side, it's much smoother looking and blended nicer. That's because the transparent ground is on there. So I have this other painted paper, and I use papers like scrap papers like this for paint palettes a lot. So, and then when I'm done, then I let it dry. I use them for embellishment or collage, or in this case, a sample. So I have 4 rows. This one has nothing on it. It's just whatever was on the paper. This one has clear, regular acrylic gesso. This is Golden's Absorbent Ground. That's why there's like a white haze on here. And this is the new Daniel Smith Transparent Watercolor Ground. So we're going to paint on these with the same colors, the same basic shape that I drew on there. And we are going to let it dry and see what happens and compare. All right? So I'm going to fast forward and I'll be right back. I'm also going to zoom in just a little bit. Okay, here's our finished comparison. So here is the one with nothing. It's just straight onto the paper. It's pretty much dry, but I don't know if you could tell when I was painting it, but it kind of beat it up on the paper in some spots where the paint and or matte medium or whatever else is on here and it wasn't straight paper. The other thing is it leaked right through. See the wet spot? If you're working on watercolor paper, that's not an issue, but maybe you want to do a little bit of watercoloring over another kind of paper and you just want to add a little bit of watercolor to it. If you don't treat it first, it's probably not going to react well. The paper's not meant for watercolor like this one. This is just mixed media paper, so if I get it too wet, it's going to just fall apart. So it's okay, but it's not my favorite. Here's a clear gesso. Now, I think, in my opinion, it works just as good as the transparent ground. I think the color saturation is comparable, and I didn't get too much beating up of the water. I got a nice, smooth, even coating of paint. The biggest difference is something you guys can't tell on camera. So this is Liquitex Clear Gesso. It's really rough and sandpapery. This is really smooth. Like, I can't even tell you. Can you hear the difference maybe? There's a big difference in how they feel, and I love the way this one feels, especially for the watercolor paint, more than how this one does. I could use this one in a pinch, but I love this one. I also think that it was easier for me to get a variation in tone of color, especially with these blues and the green too, though, on the transparent ground than it was on the clear gesso. Although I used the same, you know, I was sloppy about it, obviously, but I put the paint basically in the same places. You really don't even get that there's any darker spots in the green as you do on here. And then the Absorbent Ground worked great. You know, the paint is nice and smooth. You can see the lighter green, the darker green. It's nice and even. It didn't bead, but it's white and hazy. And when you're working on a piece of paper that already has interesting marks and maybe some collage on it, and you want to add a layer of watercolors on top of that, painting it out white maybe is not what you want to do. Now, if you want to just mute the colors a little bit and then watercolor over it, then the Absorbent Ground would work well if you put it on in a thin coat. It would work really well. And I may have a time when I want to do that, but for the Journaling by Fives pages, that's not what I wanted. I wanted to have all the marks I already have on there to show through and have the watercolor be an accent. So this is going to be the product I'm going to use. I'm really happy I bought it. I was really intrigued by the black one, but I'm thinking if I just painted a paper black and then put transparent ground over it, that would probably be the same thing, or use transparent ground on a piece of black cardstock. That would probably work well too, because I'm thinking the metallic watercolors that I made, the homemade ones, and the Twinkling H2Os They would look really great on black. So I almost bought it, but I don't really probably need it. I probably can use a workaround. But Daniel Smith, if you're watching, you can send me free products. I'll plug them all day long. I love your stuff. So anyway, I hope that gives you guys some ideas of what you can do. Go to danielsmith.com and take a look around. Like I said, their stuff is not inexpensive, but they do have sales, and you can sign up for their newsletter and do like I did. Just buy 1 or 2 tubes or pots or whatever at a time. Or maybe go in with a friend so you can split the shipping cost, or split the cost of the tubes, and you can each, you know, squeeze half the tube out into each of your palettes, something like that. There's always a workaround. All right, I'll see you all later. Don't forget to go out and have a great day. Do something nice for yourself because you deserve it, and I'll see you later.